The unexpected visitor. It was a quiet night on the distant colony planet, far away from Earth. Jack, a young man in his late 20s, was sound asleep in his small metal-walled shelter. The cold outside was biting, the kind that could freeze water in seconds. Inside, Jack's heating system hummed softly, keeping him warm as he dreamed of simpler days back on Earth. Suddenly, Jack felt something strange. His bed creaked, and a warm, unfamiliar weight pressed down beside him. His eyes snapped open, and his heart began to race. Someone, or something, was lying next to him in the dark. Jack froze, his breath caught in his throat. He squinted through the dim light, trying to make sense of the shape beside him. A figure with smooth, pale skin and long, silvery hair was curled up under his blanket. She looked almost human, except for her glowing blue eyes that stared right into his. Before Jack could yell or move, the figure spoke in a trembling but calm voice. "Do not panic," she said, her words slightly accented but clear. "This is a survival ritual. If you move, we could both die." Jack's body tensed, but something in her voice kept him still. Survival ritual. What did that mean? Who was she? And how had she even gotten inside his locked shelter? Questions swirled in his mind, but fear held his tongue. I don't understand," Jack finally stammered, his voice shaking. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The woman shifted slightly, her body still pressed close to his. "My name is Kalia," she said. "I am not from your world. My ship crashed nearby. My species cannot survive this cold alone. We need warmth, human warmth, to generate energy." Jack blinked, trying to process her words. An alien? In his bed? Talking about survival. It felt like a bad dream. But the icy draft creeping in from the edges of his blanket told him it was all too real. Kalia continued, her voice soft but urgent. "I did not mean to frighten you. I sensed warmth here, and I had no choice. If I hadn't come inside, I would already be dead." Jack's fear was quickly replaced by confusion and frustration. "You broke into my home and crawled into my bed without asking," he said, sitting up slightly. "Do you know how crazy this sounds?" Kalia flinched at his tone, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. "I understand your anger," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I promise, I mean you no harm. I only needed enough warmth to survive the night." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. She looked fragile, almost human, but the faint shimmer of her skin and the glow in her eyes were undeniable signs she was something else entirely. Despite her strange appearance, there was something about her tone, pleading, almost desperate, that made it hard to stay angry. "Fine," Jack muttered, lying back down cautiously. "But you'd better explain everything in the morning. And don't try anything funny." Kalia nodded, curling up again, but keeping a respectful distance. "Thank you," she whispered. "You may have saved my life." Jack stared at the ceiling, his thoughts too loud to let him sleep. Who was this alien woman? Was she really harmless, or was she lying? And what did she mean by, "we could both die"? The questions swirled in his head until exhaustion finally pulled him back into an uneasy sleep. When Jack woke up the next morning, Kalia was still there, sitting quietly in a corner of the room. She looked small and nervous, her silver hair reflecting the soft light of the rising sun. The room was warmer than usual, a stark contrast to the freezing temperatures outside. Jack sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "Start talking. What are you, and why are you here?" Kalia met his gaze, her glowing eyes steady but calm. "I am a scientist from a planet far from here," she said. "Our ship was damaged, and I became separated from my crew. Your planet's cold is too much for my body. Without warmth, my cells begin to shut down." Jack crossed his arms, still skeptical. "And your crew? Where are they?" Kalia hesitated, her expression troubled. "I do not know," she admitted, "but they are not like me. They will not ask for warmth. They will take it. That is why I ran. Jack's stomach sank at her words. If there were more aliens out there, and they weren't as polite as Kalia, he might have more problems than just an unexpected visitor. As the morning light filled the room, Jack realized his life had just taken a turn he could never have imagined. An alien woman was sitting in his home, and she was warning him about dangers he couldn't even begin to understand. The alien's explanation. The sun had barely risen over the icy plains outside when Jack found himself sitting across from Kalia, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He had offered her a cup, but she politely declined, claiming her body didn't process liquids the way humans did. It was just one of the many oddities Jack was trying to wrap his head around. Kalia sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Despite the strange shimmer of her skin and the faint glow of her eyes, her posture was calm and composed, almost human. But her presence still felt otherworldly, like a star that had fallen from the sky and landed in his living room. Jack finally broke the silence. "Okay, Kalia, you said something about a survival ritual last night. Start from the beginning. What are you? Why are you here? And why on earth did you think sneaking into my bed was a good idea?" Kalia nodded, her glowing eyes softening slightly. "I will explain," she said. Her voice was gentle but carried a weight of urgency. "But first, you must understand my species. We are called the Valtheri. We are an energy-dependent race. Unlike humans, who consume food for energy, we draw it directly from external heat sources. Our bodies are designed to convert heat into life-sustaining energy." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you run on heat, like some kind of walking solar panel?" Kalia tilted her head, considering the comparison. "In a way, yes. But we do not store energy as you might expect. We require a steady source, especially in extreme environments like this one. When our ship crashed here, the cold began to drain my energy reserves faster than I could replenish them." Jack frowned. "And your solution was to break into my home?" Kalia's expression turned serious. "It was not my first choice, believe me. But I had no time. My sensors detected heat in this shelter, your heat, and I was on the verge of collapse. In my culture, sharing warmth is considered a survival ritual. It is not invasive or harmful, but I see now that humans might view it differently." Jack sipped his coffee, trying to process her words. "So, you're saying you need heat to survive? And last night, if I hadn't let you stay..." Kalia looked down, her silvery hair falling over her face. "I would not be alive this morning," she admitted quietly. The weight of her words hit Jack harder than he expected. He had never considered himself a hero, but knowing that his simple act of staying still had saved a life, even an alien one, made him feel strangely responsible. "Fine," Jack said, setting his cup down. "I get that you were desperate. But what about your crew? You mentioned them last night. Are they in the same situation as you?" Kalia's hands tightened in her lap. "Not exactly," she said, her tone darkening. "When our ship was damaged, our command protocols broke down. My crew, what remains of them, have abandoned our laws. They see humans as nothing more than heat sources to be used and discarded. I could not accept that." Jack leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "Wait, are you saying your crew is out there, hunting people for warmth?" Kalia nodded solemnly. "I fear so. They believe survival justifies any action, even at the expense of others. I escaped from them because I refuse to harm anyone, but they are searching for me. And now that I've come here, your life may be in danger too." Jack stared at her, a knot forming in his stomach. He had always thought living on this remote colony was tough, but the worst he dealt with were the occasional supply shortages and harsh weather. Now, he was hearing that a group of alien heat vampires, Kalia's own words echoed in his mind, might be stalking the area. "What do they want with you?" Jack asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Kalia hesitated, then met his gaze. "I am a scientist. I carry knowledge that could help them survive in less destructive ways. but they see me as a threat because I defy their orders. If they find me, they will either force me to join them or eliminate me." Jack rubbed his temples, trying to think. "Great," he muttered. "So not only do I have an alien in my house, but she's being hunted by a group of her own kind who think humans are disposable. Anything else I should know?" Kalia's expression softened, and for the first time, a hint of vulnerability crossed her features. "Only this," she said quietly. "I did not come here to endanger you. If I had another option, I would take it. But I need your help." Jack sighed, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, this was insane, a literal alien fugitive asking for his help to survive. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the memory of her trembling voice in the dark, pleading for warmth. Finally, he looked her in the eye. "All right, Kalia," he said. "I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I'll help you. Just don't make me regret it." Kalia gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Jack," she said. "I will do everything I can to keep us both safe." But even as she spoke, a faint beeping sound from her wrist device caught her attention. Her expression shifted to one of alarm. "What is it?" Jack asked, his heart skipping a beat. Kalia looked up at him, her glowing eyes now sharp with urgency. "They're close. My crew. They've picked up my trail. A dangerous alliance." Jack's heart pounded as Kalia's words sank in. Her crew, those rogue, heat-hungry aliens, were nearby. The safety of his once isolated life on the frozen colony now felt like a distant memory. "What do you mean they've picked up your trail?" Jack demanded, standing from his chair. Kalia's wrist device continued its soft, rhythmic beeping. "They must have detected the energy signature I released when I stabilized last night," she explained, her glowing eyes narrowing in thought. "I had hoped the storm would mask my presence, but they are persistent." Jack ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Okay, great. So now I'm a sitting duck in my own home. Do they know exactly where we are?" Kalia glanced at her device, her expression grim. "Not yet, but they are closing in. We have a short window to prepare." Jack's survival instincts kicked in. Living on the edge of a barely habitable world had taught him a few things about staying alive, even if his opponents weren't usually extraterrestrial. "What are we dealing with here? Weapons? Numbers? How dangerous are they?" Kalia hesitated before answering. "There are 3 of them, as far as I know. All are trained soldiers with advanced weapons, including thermal trackers that can pinpoint heat signatures. They won't hesitate to harm you if they believe it will get them what they need." Jack swore under his breath. "And I suppose you don't have a hidden arsenal of alien weapons lying around to even the odds?" Kalia's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. "No, but I do have my knowledge. If you trust me, I can help us both survive." Jack stopped pacing and looked at her. Despite the danger, there was a strange steadiness in her voice, a quiet determination that made him believe she wasn't giving up without a fight. "All right," he said, nodding. "What do we need to do?" Kalia stood, her movements fluid and purposeful. "First, we need to mask our heat signatures. Your heating system will make this shelter a beacon to them. Turn it off." Jack's eyes widened. "Turn off the heat. You do realize it's practically Arctic out there, right?" "I know," Kalia said, meeting his gaze. "But it's our only chance to stay hidden long enough to prepare a defense. We can layer clothing to conserve body heat." Jack grumbled but moved to the control panel, shutting off the heating system. The low hum that had been a constant background noise disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence. Within moments, the air inside the shelter began to cool. Kalia was already moving, her glowing eyes scanning the room. "Next, we need to block any weak points in your shelter. If they decide to breach, they will target vents and entry points." Jack grabbed a toolbox and started sealing the vents with insulation panels, while Kalia worked on reinforcing the door using some kind of alien adhesive from her wrist device. Despite the tension, Jack couldn't help but be impressed by her efficiency. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jack asked as he worked. Kalia didn't look up. "Not exactly," she said. "But I've spent my life studying survival strategies, and when you're hunted by your own people, you learn quickly." Jack paused, glancing at her. "Why did you leave them, anyway? I mean, they're your crew. Shouldn't you all be working together?" Kalia stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. "My crew abandoned our principles the moment we crashed here. We have strict laws about interacting with other species. We are not to harm or exploit them. But the cold and desperation, it changed them. They decided human lives were expendable. I couldn't be part of that." Jack nodded slowly, a newfound respect for her growing. "So, you're the rebel." Kalia gave a small, sad smile. "Perhaps, but it's a title I'll accept if it means doing what's right." Before Jack could respond, a loud ping echoed from Kalia's device. Her expression turned grim. "They're closer now, less than 2 kilometers away." Jack's pulse quickened. "Okay, so what's the plan if they find us?" Kalia tapped her wrist device, projecting a small, glowing map of the area. "Your shelter is strong, but it won't hold forever. We need to create distractions and lead them away. If I can disable their trackers, they'll lose their biggest advantage." Jack frowned, studying the map. "And how exactly do we do that?" Kalia pointed to a series of heat vents outside, where the colony's underground systems expelled occasional bursts of hot air. "We'll redirect the vent heat to create false trails. If they follow those instead of coming straight here, we'll have time to disable their equipment." Jack considered her plan. It was risky, but it was better than sitting around waiting to be found. "All right," he said. "Let's do it. But if this goes sideways—" "It won't," Kalia said firmly, her glowing eyes meeting his. "We'll survive this, together." With that, they gathered supplies and braced themselves for the freezing temperatures outside. Jack layered himself in every piece of clothing he could find, while Kalia adjusted the settings on her suit to better conserve energy. As they stepped out into the icy wasteland, the wind howled around them, and Jack's breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Somewhere out there, 3 hostile aliens were hunting them. But as he glanced at Kalia, her determined expression cutting through the cold, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Whatever happened next, he wasn't going down without a fight. The hunters arrive. The cold outside was relentless, the kind of bone-chilling frost that even the thickest layers of clothing couldn't completely fend off. Jack and Kalia worked quickly, their breath fogging the air as they rerouted the heat vents from the underground colony systems. Every few minutes, Kalia would check her wrist device, her glowing eyes narrowing with each beep that indicated the hunters were closing in. "They're less than a kilometer away now," Kalia said, her voice calm but urgent. "The false heat trails are in place. If we're lucky, it will buy us enough time to return to the shelter and prepare for their next move." Jack tightened the scarf around his neck, his fingers numbed despite the thermal gloves he wore. "Lucky," he muttered. "We're standing out here like targets while a bunch of alien soldiers are tracking us. Not exactly what I'd call lucky." Kalia glanced at him, her expression softening. "I understand your frustration, Jack, but we must act carefully. If they find us too soon, we won't have a chance." Jack sighed, nodding. He wasn't used to feeling helpless, but this situation was unlike anything he'd ever faced. With the false trails set, they hurried back to the shelter, slipping inside just as the faint hum of an approaching alien craft reached their ears. Inside, the tension was palpable. Jack double-checked the reinforced door while Kalia adjusted her wrist device, scanning for signs of the hunters. The temperature inside the shelter had dropped even further, and Jack could see his breath hanging in the air. "They've landed," Kalia said quietly, "about 500 meters from here." Jack's stomach twisted. "And they'll come here next." Kalia nodded. "If the heat trails don't distract them, yes." The two fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Jack glanced at Kalia, who was focused intently on her device. Despite the danger, she seemed calm, almost serene. He invited her composure. "How are you so calm?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kalia looked up, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I've had to face difficult situations before. Fear doesn't help. Focus does." Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure he could follow her advice. His hand shook slightly as he checked the tools he'd laid out: a wrench, a crowbar, and a small energy pistol he'd scavenged from an old colony outpost. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Suddenly, Kalia's device beeped sharply. Her expression darkened. "They've split up," she said. "One of them is following the heat trail, but two are heading straight here." Jack gripped the energy pistol, his heart pounding. "How long do we have?" Kalia's fingers moved rapidly across her device. 10 minutes, maybe less. The first sign of the hunters was the faint sound of crunching snow outside the shelter. Jack's breath hitched as he strained to hear. Kalia motioned for him to stay quiet, her glowing eyes fixed on the door. A loud thud echoed through the small space as one of the hunters tested the door. Jack tightened his grip on the pistol, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "They're scanning the structure," Kalia whispered, "looking for weaknesses." Jack's mind raced. "Can't we do something to stop them? Set a trap, or—" Kalia cut him off with a raised hand. "Trust me. Stay low and wait." The next sound was the unmistakable hiss of something melting. Jack's eyes widened as he realized the hunters were using a thermal cutter to breach the door. "They're coming in," he hissed. Kalia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tapped a sequence on her wrist device. A soft hum filled the air, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. Jack's teeth chattered as the cold intensified, but Kalia remained focused. "What are you doing?" Jack whispered through clenched teeth. "Masking our heat signatures," Kalia replied. "If they can't see us, we'll have the advantage." The door burst open with a deafening crash, and two tall, armored figures stepped inside. Their suits gleamed in the dim light, and their faces were obscured by sleek helmets. They carried weapons that glowed faintly, their movements precise and deliberate. Jack's heart pounded as he pressed himself against the wall, staying as still as possible. Kalia crouched beside him, her breathing steady despite the danger. The hunters scanned the room, their helmets swiveling as they searched for signs of life. One of them spoke in a guttural language Jack didn't understand, but Kalia tensed beside him, her expression grim. "They think the heat trail was a trick," she whispered. "They're suspicious." Jack's fingers tightened around the pistol. "What do we do?" Kalia glanced at him, her glowing eyes fierce. "Wait for my signal." One of the hunters moved toward the center of the room, while the other stayed near the door, covering the exit. Kalia's wrist device emitted a faint beep, and she nodded to Jack. "Now," she whispered. Jack didn't hesitate. He aimed the pistol at the hunter near the door and fired. The energy bolt struck the alien's shoulder, sending it stumbling back. Before it could recover, Kalia sprang into action, activating a small device that emitted a blinding flash of light. The second hunter staggered, disoriented by the sudden burst. Kalia lunged forward, using her agility to knock the weapon from its hands. Jack scrambled to his feet, firing another shot at the first hunter, who was now retreating toward the door. Within seconds, the room was filled with chaos. Jack and Kalia fought side by side, their movements a blend of desperation and determination. Despite the odds, they managed to drive the hunters out of the shelter. As the door slammed shut behind them, Jack collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. Kalia crouched beside him, her glowing eyes scanning the room for any signs of further danger. "They'll regroup," she said, her voice steady. "We need to be ready." Jack nodded, his exhaustion giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "Then we fight," he said. "Whatever it takes." Kalia gave him a small, approving smile. "Together," she said. "We'll survive this. Together." The bond deepens. The silence after the skirmish was almost deafening. Jack slumped against the wall, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His hands were still trembling, not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline surging through his veins. Kalia stood nearby, her glowing eyes fixed on the sealed door. Her expression was calm, but Jack could sense the tension in her body. "Are they coming back?" Jack finally asked, breaking the silence. Kalia shook her head. "Not immediately. They will retreat to analyze the situation and plan their next move. But we've gained some time." Jack rubbed his face, trying to process everything. Time for what? To wait for them to kick the door down again. This is insane. Kalia turned to him, her expression softening. "Time to prepare," she said, "and to rest. You've done well, Jack. Better than I expected." Jack let out a short laugh, though it held no humor. "Great. Glad I could impress the alien fugitive." Kalia's lips curved into a faint smile. "I mean it. Most humans would have panicked or surrendered. You fought back, even when the odds were against you." Jack leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly have a choice, did I?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The temperature in the shelter was still bitterly cold, but the tension between them seemed to ease. Jack opened his eyes and looked at Kalia, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, her silvery hair catching the dim light. "You said something earlier," Jack began, "about how your people see humans as expendable, like we're just resources to them." Kalia nodded slowly. "Yes, to them, your kind is primitive, disposable. They do not see your potential as I do." Jack frowned. "Our potential? What's that supposed to mean?" Kalia hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "Your species is unique, Jack. You are resilient, adaptable, and driven by a kind of compassion that many other species lack. Even in the face of fear, you care for others. That is a rare and powerful trait." Jack snorted. "Yeah, tell that to the history books. Humans aren't exactly known for being saints." Kalia tilted her head, her glowing eyes studying him intently. "You are flawed, yes, but it is your flaws that make you remarkable. You fight, you endure, and you grow stronger because of them. That is why I chose to come here, to seek refuge with you instead of staying with my crew." Jack blinked, taken aback. "You chose me. Why?" Kalia's gaze softened. "Because I saw something in you, Jack. Something that reminded me of the ideals I've spent my life studying and defending. You are not perfect, but you have the capacity for greatness. And I needed to believe that not all hope was lost." For a moment, Jack didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being talked about like that, like he was more than just some guy trying to survive on a frozen wasteland of a planet. It felt strange, humbling. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I guess I'll take that as a compliment." Kalia smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it felt genuine. "You should." The hours passed slowly as they worked together to fortify the shelter further. Kalia shared what she knew about her people's technology, teaching Jack how to use scraps of her damaged equipment to create makeshift defenses. She explained the science behind her species' energy conversion, which Jack found both fascinating and deeply unsettling. "So you're telling me your body can literally drain heat from a person if you're desperate enough?" Jack asked as he adjusted a heat vent. Kalia nodded, her expression serious. "Yes, but it is not something I would ever do willingly. It is invasive, and it often results in harm. That is why I chose to come here instead of resorting to such measures." Jack shivered, though not from the cold. "Your crew doesn't seem to share that moral code." Kalia's expression darkened. "No, they see survival as justification for any action. But I refuse to believe that survival must come at the expense of others." Jack paused, looking at her. "You really believe that, don't you?" Kalia met his gaze. "I do, and I believe that you do too." As the day wore on, Jack began to see Kalia in a new light. She wasn't just an alien intruder or a fugitive running from her people. She was someone who had made a choice, a hard, dangerous choice, to stand by her principles, even when it meant risking everything. Despite the danger looming outside, Jack found himself opening up to her. He told her about his life on Earth, how he'd come to this colony to escape the noise and chaos of humanity. He talked about the loneliness he hadn't realized was eating away at him until now. Kalia listened intently, her glowing eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she said softly, "You are braver than you realize, Jack. It takes courage to leave everything behind and start anew." Jack shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I was just running away." Kalia reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was cool but gentle. Sometimes running away is the first step toward finding where you truly belong. Jack looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone truly saw him, not just as a survivor or a loner, but as a person. "Thanks," he said quietly. Kalia smiled. "Thank you, Jack, for giving me a chance." As night fell, the temperature dropped even further, and the shelter felt like a fragile bubble in the vast, frozen wilderness. Jack and Kalia sat side by side near the sealed door, their breaths fogging the air. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the crucible of survival. Whatever came next, they both knew they would face it together. The final confrontation. The night was colder than any Jack had experienced since moving to the colony. The temperature inside the shelter had dropped so low that frost clung to the metal walls, and every breath felt like a tiny shard of ice splicing through his throat. He wrapped himself in layers of blankets and clothing, but the cold was relentless. Kalia, however, seemed unfazed. Her alien physiology allowed her to endure the cold better than Jack, but even she seemed unusually tense. "They're making their move," Kalia said suddenly, her glowing eyes fixed on her wrist device. The faint hum of the scanner she'd activated earlier filled the room. Jack sat up, his body stiff from the cold and hours of waiting. "How do you know?" Kalia turned the device toward him, displaying a holographic map of the surrounding area. 3 glowing dots moved steadily toward the shelter, their paths converging like predators stalking prey. "They've regrouped," she explained. "Their scans must have revealed the false heat trails. They're coming here with the intent to end this." Jack's stomach churned. "Great. So what's the plan? Because I don't think we can just lock the door and hope they go away." Kalia's expression was grim but focused. "We have to meet them head on. If we wait for them to breach the shelter, we'll be trapped with no way out." Jack frowned. "Head on? You're talking about fighting them outside? In this cold?" Kalia nodded. "It's the only way. The cold works to our advantage. Their suits are designed for combat, but prolonged exposure to this environment will strain their systems. If we can separate them, we'll have a chance." Jack hesitated, staring at the glowing map. "And if we can't separate them?" Kalia's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure they don't leave this place alive." The two of them worked quickly, gathering what supplies they could. Kalia handed Jack a small device from her wristband. It was about the size of a coin, smooth and cold to the touch. "What's this?" Jack asked, turning it over in his hand. "A thermal disruptor," Kalia explained. "When activated, it will overload their heat sensors, creating a temporary blind spot. It won't last long, but it might give us the opening we need." Jack nodded, tucking the device into his pocket. "Anything else?" Kalia hesitated, then held out a sleek alien weapon. It was small, about the size of a handgun, with a faint blue glow along its edges. "Take this," she said. "It's not designed for humans, but you should be able to fire it in an emergency." Jack took the weapon, feeling its weight in his hand. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Kalia allowed herself a small smile. "I prefer to call it preparation." They stepped out into the night, the cold biting at Jack's exposed skin despite the layers of clothing he wore. The sky above was clear, the stars shining like frozen sparks against the black expanse. The only sound was the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Kelia led the way, her movements swift and deliberate. They took cover behind a cluster of boulders about 50 meters from the shelter, where they had a clear view of the open ground leading to their home. "They'll approach cautiously," Kelia whispered. "They know we're aware of their presence. Stay low and wait for my signal." Jack nodded, gripping the alien weapon tightly. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He had faced challenges before: harsh winters, supply shortages, even the occasional wildlife attack. But this was different. This was life or death, with no guarantees of survival. The first figure appeared moments later, a shadow moving against the snowy landscape. The hunter's suit gleamed under the starlight, its sleek design making it look more machine than flesh. A second and third figure followed, fanning out to form a wide arc around the shelter. "They're searching for entry points," Kelia murmured. "We need to act before they surround us." Jack swallowed hard. "What's the signal?" Kelia didn't answer. Instead, she activated a device on her wrist, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. The hunters froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Kelia raised her hand, signaling Jack to stay low, and then threw a small, glowing orb toward the closest hunter. The orb detonated with a flash of blinding light, sending the hunter stumbling backward. Jack seized the opportunity, leaping from cover and firing the alien weapon. The blue energy bolt struck the hunter's leg, and it collapsed into the snow. The second and third hunters reacted instantly, their weapons firing rapid bursts of energy in Jack's direction. He dove back behind the boulders, his heart racing as beams of light scorched the ground around him. Kelia moved like a shadow, her agility unmatched. She darted toward the second hunter, her hands a blur as she activated another device. A pulse of energy rippled outward, disrupting the hunter's weapon and leaving it vulnerable. Kelia struck with precision, disarming the alien and delivering a swift blow that sent it sprawling. The third hunter turned its attention to Kelia, raising its weapon to fire. Jack saw the movement and acted without thinking. He activated the thermal disruptor she had given him, and the hunter's aim wavered as its sensors malfunctioned. Jack fired another shot from the alien weapon, striking the hunter in the shoulder. It roared in pain, but before it could recover, Kelia was upon it. With a final, calculated strike, she brought the last hunter down. The battlefield fell silent, the only sound the soft rustling of the wind through the snow. Jack sank to his knees, his body trembling from exhaustion and the cold. Kelia stood over the fallen hunters, her glowing eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Satisfied that the danger had passed, she turned to Jack and offered him her hand. "You did well," she said, her voice steady. Jack took her hand, allowing her to pull him to his feet. "I didn't think we'd actually make it." Kelia smiled faintly. "I told you. Together, we survive." As they made their way back to the shelter, Jack couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and unease. They had won this battle, but he knew the war wasn't over. The hunter's defeat would only raise more questions, draw more attention. But for now, they had each other. And that, Jack realized, was enough. Hope and farewell. The warmth of the shelter felt like a distant memory, even though it had only been a few hours since they'd returned. The cold was still biting, and the air was thick with tension. The defeat of Kelia's pursuers had left them with a temporary sense of safety, but Jack knew better than to think it was over. The colony wasn't large, and there were still countless dangers lurking out there, some far worse than alien hunters. Kelia was sitting across from him, her glowing eyes steady, her posture rigid as usual. She hadn't spoken much since they returned from the confrontation. Jack, on the other hand, had a million questions, but he could tell she was lost in thought, the events of the day weighing heavily on her. The shelter was quiet now, and the only sound was the low hum of the backup heater Kelia had activated to keep them warm. The temperature outside remained a deadly freeze, But inside, there was a sense of stillness that spoke louder than any noise. "So, what now?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Kalia looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Now, we wait. We stay vigilant. They will return. It's only a matter of time before they regroup and send more forces." Jack rubbed his eyes, his body weary from the constant tension of the past few days. "And then what?" "You can't keep running forever, Kalia." Kalia's gaze shifted to the window, her eyes distant. "I know. I cannot outrun my past forever. But for now, I must stay hidden. A colony, it offers temporary safety. But even here, the risk remains. They will not stop until they have either captured me or eliminated me." Jack stood up, pacing around the small room. His mind raced as he thought about the future, about what might happen next. It was strange. Just a few days ago, his biggest worry was the cold, the isolation of the colony. Now he was caught in a struggle between alien factions, with an alien woman who, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, had become something of an ally, even a friend. "You know, I've been thinking," Jack said, stopping in his tracks. "You could go. Get out of here. Find a ship, anything. I could help you." Kalia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I could, but it would be dangerous for both of us. Even if I escaped, my crew is not the only threat. If word gets out about my defection, there are others who would hunt me for a different reason. Some see me as a traitor, and they do not show mercy." Jack clenched his fists, frustration welling up inside him. "So we're just supposed to sit here and wait for more of them to show up? Hope they don't find us." Kalia stood and walked over to the small window, staring out at the barren, snow-covered landscape. "It is not about hope, Jack. It is about survival. And survival requires patience." Jack walked up behind her, trying to get a better look outside, but all he could see was the swirling snowstorm. "I don't think I'm very good at patience," he muttered. Kalia turned toward him, her eyes locking onto his with surprising intensity. "You're stronger than you realize. You fought with everything you had to protect yourself. You survived when everything seemed impossible. That strength is what will see you through the next phase." Jack didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to hearing things like that. Kalia's words, despite their calm, carried a weight that pressed down on him. "I didn't ask for this, Kalia," Jack said, his voice quieter than he intended. "I never signed up to fight alien soldiers or risk my life for some fugitive from another planet." "I understand," Kalia replied softly. "I never asked for this either. But I've come to realize something in my time with you, Jack. You are not just surviving. You are changing. You have the capacity for greatness, even if you don't see it yet." Jack shook his head. "I'm just trying to get through the day. That's all I can do." Kalia smiled faintly. "That is more than enough." The silence that followed was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was as if something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding forming without words. Jack didn't fully understand what Kalia meant about his potential, but something inside him had started to stir, something that told him he wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. He had a choice, and he could take control of his future. The next few hours passed quietly, both of them lost in thought. Jack spent time reinforcing the shelter's defenses, checking the communication equipment he had on hand, while Kalia worked on recalibrating some of her alien devices. She showed him how to use a small, portable energy generator she had scavenged from her ship, which could help them stay hidden longer by masking their heat signature. As they worked side by side, there was a quiet comfort in their company. The tension had settled, but the unease of knowing they weren't safe lingered in the background. The worst part was the uncertainty, the knowledge that their enemies were out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Later that evening, Kalia approached Jack with something in her hand, a small alien artifact, no larger than a marble, but it glowed with an ethereal light. "What's this?" Jack asked, taking it from her. "This," Kalia said, her voice almost reverent, "is a piece of my people's history. It's a tool used for communication, a way to bridge the gap between minds, even across great distances. I've been carrying it for years, hoping one day I would find someone who could understand its significance. Jack frowned, turning the small artifact over in his hand. What do you mean? What's it supposed to do? Callia's eyes glowed softly, and for the first time, Jack saw a glimpse of the alien world she came from. A world of intelligence, technology, and a deep connection to the cosmos. It's more than a tool, Callia said. It's a way of reaching out, and it's a symbol of trust. I'm giving it to you, Jack, because I trust you more than anyone I've known. Jack was taken aback. He had no idea what it meant, but the look in her eyes told him that this wasn't just some trinket. It was something far deeper, something that transcended words. I don't know what to say, Jack muttered, the weight of her trust settling heavily on his shoulders. Callia smiled softly. There is nothing to say. Just know that you are not alone in this, and when the time comes, you will know what to do with it. As the days passed, Jack and Callia's bond deepened. They worked together to stay hidden, to keep their shelter fortified. But they also shared moments of quiet conversation about their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Jack found himself thinking more and more about the future, about what might lie ahead. He no longer felt like a lone survivor on a cold, desolate planet. With Callia, he felt like part of something greater. Eventually, the day came when Callia knew the time had come to leave. A distress signal had been received, one that was far more powerful than anything the colony could handle. Help was on the way. Earth was sending reinforcements, but the moment of relief came with a price. Callia knew she couldn't stay. I have to go, Callia said one morning, her voice soft but firm. The risk is too great. The hunters will follow the signal, and they'll only bring more danger to you. Jack's heart sank. You can't leave. Not now. Not when things are finally looking up. Callia placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch cool but comforting. I have to. But I will return, Jack. When it's safe. Jack didn't want to let go. He didn't want to face the cold emptiness of the planet alone again. But Callia was right. Her presence was a target, and as much as he hated it, he knew that if she stayed, it would put both of them at risk. Will I see you again? Jack asked, his voice almost a whisper. Callia gave him one last smile, one that was full of hope and promise. Yes, you will. And with that, she left the shelter, disappearing into the snowstorm, her figure slowly blending into the white expanse. Jack watched her go, feeling the weight of their parting, but also a flicker of hope that they would meet again when the stars aligned and the war was over. For now, all he could do was wait.